Get to Know Your IDA podcast, hosted by the Erie County Industrial Development Agency. My name is Robbie Ann McPherson. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director for the ECIDA. And the goal of our podcast is to debunk myths and explore some of the more complex community benefits and processes that the IDA goes through to help job growth, to help economic growth, and to help create a healthy economic ecosystem. Today, we are very excited to have an important guest. He is the Executive Director / CEO / CFO of the Town of Amherst IDA. Please welcome Dave Mingoia. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Robbie. Appreciate the invitation.
So that's a lot of hats you wear to be Executive Director, CEO, and CFO. How is that?
Well, it's a chief cook and bottle maker, right? So, most local IDAs and economic development organizations don't have the breadth of staff a county IDA such as yours has. So we have to wear a few more hats here in our roles. We are just a traditional IDA in the sense that we have the IDA tools, and then we do have an affiliated local development corporation, but we don't have the financial programs and loan programs, which would probably require us to have additional staff. And in those cases, we need to, we appreciate the collaboration with our partners at the Erie County IDA and those types of projects that we need to bring those financial tools to.
And speaking of that, give us a little bit of insight into your background and how you arrived at the Amherst IDA.
Yeah, it's been a nearly 25-year journey at this point. At least, 15 of it has been here at the IDA. I was in planning school, getting my master's of planning. And at the time, they were offering a minor in economic development or specialization in economic development. It's when they had first started it. It was kind of the precursor to the current real estate program that is on a similar pathway at the School of Planning and Architecture at the University of Buffalo. During that time, I thought I might want to be a community planner. And as soon as I kind of sunk my teeth into an economics curriculum and real estate curriculum, I decided that was the direction I wanted to go in. So I was fortunate enough to secure an internship with Empire State Developments my second year of planning school, and that led to a full-time job working on, at the time, more community development project and waterfront planning of what is now Erie Canal Harbor. Back then, it was in its infancy of planning and engineering. And there were a few other associated smaller projects associated with that I worked on, but I transitioned over to the business development side of the office and worked my way up to run the business development staff for the 5-county region of Western New York for Empire State Developments. After doing that for a few years, I was approached by my predecessor here at the Amherst IDA, James Allen, and brought on to run local redevelopment efforts and business development efforts for this agency. And then I transitioned into my current role, as you noted in all my titles, within the last 4 years. So it's been a good journey. It's been an interesting journey. And I think anybody who's in economic development will tell you that no consecutive year is the same in the job. There's always new external economic factors. There's always new politics involved. There's always new innovation in the marketplace that we have to respond to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of those things. Yes, and no two projects are even ever alike. It's all a lot of snowflakes. So speaking of business development, Amherst is an interesting town. So you have a population somewhere between 125,000, 150,000?
Yeah, it's nearly 130,000 now. And every time the biennial census is updated, you look at Amherst tends to exceed its projected population growth significantly. I think at one point we looked at it in 2010 and the town was supposed to be around 85,000 people. But I mean, obviously we know that's not the case, being here just in 2021 and there's nearly 130,000 people.
Wow. Yeah. And for a town that at one time, many, many decades ago, was kind of a bedroom community, just a quiet suburb of Buffalo, it's now really become a commercial powerhouse. So I thought maybe you could address a little bit of the importance of balancing in a bedroom community a commercial tax base, and just talk a little bit about the role that the IDA plays in keeping the property taxes in Amherst for the people as low as they can possibly be.
Right. I think it's definitely important. And when a lot of people think of Amherst, they think of the first spring suburb bedroom community of Buffalo. But in a sense, we are a small city. Amherst, if you look at it based on population, is the fourth largest community in upstate New York. It's bigger than the city of Albany. It's just a little bit less than the city of Syracuse. And then obviously it's behind Rochester and the city of Buffalo as well, which it's good news that the city started to grow as well, because that's reversed decades of decline. One of the things that attracted me to coming out here was always that Amherst has a strong history of planning and strategic development and direction. And it started back in the 60s, in the 70s, with a comprehensive plan under the political leadership and establishing its own industrial development agency to really take advantage of the assets of the community. At the time, that was when SUNY was deciding to place one of its flagship campuses out here. So Amherst looked at it and said, what can we do to position ourselves to capitalize on the location of having this educational institution out here? And, there's a lot of back and forth and kind of armchair quarterback hindsight. That should have been in the city. It should have been here. But you think about the times, and we tend to lose that perspective. We're talking about looking at it from a lens of 2010 or 2000 or even 1990. That 60s and 70s was a period of unrest. And, in many cases, business leadership did not want campus students and activists and stuff located right near their central business district. And it's I think one of the main reasons why it was located out here, which was, considered a pretty rural location at that time. Right. Since then, everything's obviously grown up tremendously around that. But, with the advent of the Amherst IDA being established and having its first meeting in 1973, the direction back then was, okay, how do we provide space or locations for companies that want to be near the university, want to have some type of business relationship with the university, or at a minimum hire some of the engineering students and business students and liberal arts students and everything that's being produced of it. And that was really kind of the start of it.
As you said, there is so much hindsight and armchair quarterbacking about several projects in Buffalo. We all know the football stadium, and it's easy, I guess, to look back and say, well, they shoulda, woulda, coulda. But I hadn't really pieced that together, that when the decision was made to put that campus in Amherst, that did sort of change the whole scope and potential of what the town could be. So that's really interesting. And the ECIDA has been around since 1970. I guess I hadn't realized that the Amherst IDA was almost that old.
Well, from a history perspective, just on IDAs, and I don't know if any of your past guests went through this, but at the time, IDAs were created to try and stem the flow of manufacturing companies primarily to the south, and the interstate highway system and the introduction of air conditioning kind of allowed some of that movement of firms. And at the time when the state created them, they encouraged every community in the state to apply for its own IDA. And some chose not to, and some did. That's why you'll see, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would a small community like Springville, have its own IDA? And, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would a small community like Springville, have its own IDA? And, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would a small community like Springville, have its own IDA? And, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would a small community like Springville, have its own IDA? And, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would a small community like Springville, have its own IDA? And, some of our smaller neighbors and having their own IDAs as well. And you kind of think intuitively, again, from a 2021 lens, why would And I think if you look across the state, there's counties with multiple IDAs in it. Niagara County has a few, even somebody like Cattaraugus County has several. So it's just kind of a historical on IDAs back in the day and why they were created. And I think we've tried to evolve with the times and use our tool chest to facilitate the kind of economic and community development that'll keep the community healthy and advancing.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit. So we have in Erie County, we have the Erie County IDA, and our jurisdiction is the entire county. So theoretically, we could do a deal or incentivize a project anywhere. But we also have the Amherst IDA, we have the Hamburg IDA, the Lancaster IDA, and Concord IDA, which I think at the moment is kind of dormant, right?
Yeah, it's in limbo right now. We're not sure what the future is. I think Clarence is the other one we want to mention.
Right, exactly, and Clarence. So let's talk about why is it important for a Clarence to have an IDA or for Amherst, et cetera? Tell me what that does for the community.
Well, at the time, the political leadership felt that they wanted to have their own agency responsive to implementing their community plan. That's really been, I think, the basis for it. I think we've all learned to collaborate, work off a common playbook in terms of incentives and pilot schedules and intermunicipal move of companies and such. So we've learned to play a lot better in the sandbox of Erie County and Western New York in the last 20 years.
Definitely.
But I think having these additional resources has helped us really advance as a region. I know from Amherst perspective, it's important for a town of this size to have its own economic development agency. I mean, the town has one of the largest planning departments, outside of the city of Buffalo regionally, and we've always prided ourselves as being the implementation tool of what the community wants in terms of development and enhancing things, even more so, I think, in the community development direction and placemaking direction. In the last 10 years, there's been a huge impetus to take a look at, leveraging former big box retail stores and malls that in 2021 don't have the same impact, the same attraction to people as they did, 10, 15 years ago. At the same time, we're trying to create places people want to live at. They want to recreate at. They want to have a lifestyle, nightlife, and also work. So in a way, it's kind of a bad word sometimes, but there's some level of urbanization of the suburbs going on as we look at leveraging, huge swaths of parking lots. We've been characterizing them as gray fields for the better part of the last 10, 15 years, because you have these just large parking lots surrounding buildings. And it's like, how do we turn that into new taxable assessment, new revenues, new employment opportunities, new residential opportunities for people that want to live here? And we definitely know people want to continue to live here because the school districts have done such a great job of creating, really a best in class public education system. The three school districts in the town is attractive to anybody that wants to take advantage of students coming from it or from placing their kids in it. So it's definitely an attractive tool from a residential standpoint, and that's really driving a lot of growth.
So you touched on a point that I would like to explore a little more. So when you're looking at changing a gray field, as you say, into taxable revenue, I think that a lot of people don't realize how much strategy the IDA considers when doing projects and looking at what to incentivize and what to not incentivize. And I'm thinking in terms of, there's a recent project that just had a public meeting and I think is up for your next board meeting, which is a medical complex. And there's a piece of that where some of the tax revenue is kind of being rerouted into the whole park thing, right? Do I have that right? Can you explain a little bit about how that works? Because I think people don't realize that these kinds of benefits go on.
Mm-hmm. So we've been part of the planning process for a number of years, not only reworking our zoning code to allow for greater density, introducing such things as like a town center concept, mixed use and on-site in buildings, both vertically and horizontally across the development. And what we've done, one of the signature projects that the supervisor and the town board's been working on is this whole concept of Amherst Central Park, which is to create this enhanced experience on a former golf course, and also town-owned property that's used primarily for some recreation, but there's also some parking lots and some things over there. So it's really about reimagining that whole area, which in its entirety is about the same size, maybe a little bit larger than Central Park in Manhattan. So it's a sizable area. So one of the first projects is trying to create some of the initial infrastructure. So some of the initial boulevard development, and also some of the utilities and some recreation enhancements for some of the ball diamonds. So we have a project. It's really a state-of-the-art medical complex that brings together 5 different practices with multiple disciplines into one location that really will be a regional asset and help enhance medical services, technology and research, and even education in its proximity to UB.
And a surgical center too, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which is important if we see what's going on with the pandemic. And, if somebody listens to this in 20 years, they might not have any perspective on what's going on, but we're living it. Yeah. The hospitals are taking care of really the critical patients and don't have any capacity for some of the elective surgeries. So we need some more of those types of facilities too, where people could still get elective surgery. The hospitals in many cases are partners in it, so there's still revenues back to those institutions. So it's really a win-win for a lot of locations. But what we're doing in that particular case is we're utilizing the IDA and the tools at the IDA to capture pilot payments on the facility that are directed to a fund that will pay for those infrastructure improvements that the public's going to benefit directly from, as well as kind of a community project that the town has been working with the Sweet Home School District on for a number of years. And that is creating a new community center up in the Sweet Home School District area in the northwest section of town, which really will provide some of those after school and life mentoring types of social activities that their residents and their students really need and are lacking in that area of town. So it's utilizing one economic development project for a whole host of number of community benefits and community priorities.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to note that the land that this is going on was at the time like decommissioned athletic space, right? So you're basically taking something that had no tax revenue and was just kind of sitting there.
Right.
And now it's not only creating, a community service, with the surgical center and consolidating all of these practices, but it's also providing a bit of a revenue stream, for lack of a better term.
Well, absolutely. You had a piece of property that wasn't creating any revenue, right? It was basically owned by the public, and now is going to generate income not only for the municipalities and the special districts and such, but the school district, but it's also going to provide this other revenue stream that's going to help pay for these other community projects directly. So it's definitely something we want to do. It's kind of the bread and butter of an IDA. It's taking a piece of property and enhancing it and providing that short-term carrot that will continue to sustain in long-term taxable value and long-term property taxes. I mean, we've done an exercise. There's 320 odd buildings we've been involved with, primary buildings and expansion since the inception of the IDA. And we know, tracking those projects we've recently done and those that we've done years ago, that those buildings continue to grow tremendously in taxable assessment and are now contributing well over $30 million annually in town, county, and school district property taxes. So those are the types of things that don't happen without having an economic development agency, without having an IDA in the community. I think a lot of people don't realize that. They just read and see this huge number out there. Oh, the IDA is giving this away. Well, we're not really giving anything away. We're providing a vehicle and a partnership for financial assistance to a project where they're going to pay a little bit less on the front end to get the project done, because the long-term benefits are just exponentially better for the community than not having a project at all.
That is a great way to explain it. That and important also to remember that when you see that number, so-and-so is getting a $1.2 million tax break, that is not a check for $1.2 million. And it's not on past taxes. This is a discount, so to speak, on future taxes. And if the project is not developed, if the project doesn't come to fruition, that money doesn't exist. And it's hard to explain it to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also hard to explain the whole notion of what the other economic benefits are of a project, right? People don't think about the construction workers out there and the suppliers installing equipment and what those wages and, those taxes generated on their spending and activity lead to it, including the long-term direct employment that's going to happen at that facility. It's just huge figures where, if you look at it on a cost benefit basis, I mean, these projects are sometimes returning 20 times the amount of any kind of incentive offered.
Right. And you also said it's a very long-term return. So the fact that it's not an instant return, I think 5 years down the line, I don't see any media stories, even if we try to tell them, I don't see any media stories that say, oh yeah, remember 10 years ago when the IDA helped incentivize this project? Well, now, here are all these extrapolated benefits and it's into the hundreds of millions, sometimes $1 billion. So I think that's what makes it so difficult to demonstrate the benefits and the community benefits, because they don't show up until years later down the road. And sometimes they're so extrapolated that you might not make the connection that, oh yeah, you know what? Those 100 construction workers who made a payroll and spent it in the community, and it created this new restaurant and that new gas station and all that kind of stuff. I think that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about community development and growing, there's a magic mix, and it's not the same for every community out there, right? You need to have the right amount of commercial, right amount of recreation space, right amount of recreational and residential space. And we know, based on our figures, we have roughly 8% of the town you can characterize as commercial. So you've got to leverage that, and we don't have a lot of land left for development. If you take a ride up to the northern section of town, you're like, oh, look at all these fields and kind of forested trees and such up there. But so much of that's wetland, or it's not. It's never going to be serviced by sewers, so you're not going to develop on that. So we really, as a community, and when we look at it, it's like, how do we leverage the existing infrastructure and how do we continue to provide those enhancements? And I think that project we just talked about with the medical facility and repurposing some public land, as well as redeveloping what I would call kind of suburban adaptive reuse, which is really those malls and big boxes and such. And how do we enhance that by putting additional buildings on the out parcels and such that create new opportunities for economic activity and living, and that's really the direction we're going in on a lot of our projects.
What a great point! And did I hear you right? 8% of Amherst is commercial?
Yeah, when you look at it, you don't think about it, because what most people drive on is probably the east and the west section and the main arterials that cross and connect that, right? So. At last count, it was about 8% commercial. probably 38% residential, open space, nearly 30%. I think a lot of times when people look at a community like, oh, that place is all built out, but there's really about 30%, 3.5%, 4% ag space, agricultural space, because we still do. We have I think one of the largest area hemp growers as an example in Amherst, and some other agriculture that people don't necessarily realize. Then when you look at kind of other public land, and again, that'll include your parks and such and utilities, that's another 20 to 23%. So when people look at the impact of the IDA and how we're building everything, it's like, well, only 8% of the land in Amherst is owned commercial, and we're only touching a portion of that, right? I mean, there's only so much of that, which is the office parks and the industrial parks and some of the buildings on some of the commercial corridors and nodes that we've incentivized and gotten to grow and invest. So,
yeah, my gosh, I grew up here. I actually grew up out in Clarence, so I've and I'm old, so I've witnessed the transition right from really rural or residential. I would never have guessed that number is that low. I mean, just from my own running errands and driving around and living here, and I would have thought it was so much higher. But again, another example. When we don't really have all these complex conversations about economic development, because let's face it, it's not always that exciting. But when we do really look at the numbers and look at the facts and extrapolate those community benefits, we start realizing, oh, wow, okay, so if 20% or so is park, and then I think you said 30-ish is undeveloped, I mean, that's almost half of the town that's still open space and all that. Yeah. So I think it's all perspective, right? Context is everything.
A lot of times people their worldview is what's outside their windshield, right? So they drive down their neighborhood, they drive to the store, they drive to work, and that's what they see. But when you really get into it, you pull up, the laundry list of parcels and classifications based on zoning, it's like, well, holy cow, wait a second here.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the naysayers wouldn't necessarily believe it, but this is the facts. And Google's a great tool. And if they pulled up Google and just kind of went around the town, they would see that, oh yeah, when we think of the commercial areas, it's the major roadways, some office, industrial, and some innovation areas, and most of it by land use is residential. So, and a lot of it's single family, which is something that I think attributes a lot of the confidence and some of the values that go into the school districts, and wanting to take advantage of that. But I think we're seeing a lot of growth in kind of the multifamily into more of a condo or townhouse or some type of apartment style that's really. And I think when we look at redevelopment of the Boulevard Mall and those areas, that's what you're going to see there. You're going to see more of that kind of product, where you have vertical development on multiple floors, 5-story. There's a couple parcels that are zoned that you can get up to 8, but for the most part, you're looking at probably 3 to 5-story buildings that'll have a mixture of uses and really provide, I think, when we go to other major growing markets, that kind of lifestyle center or mixed use kind of small town center type of development.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you brought up the Boulevard Mall too, and the the idea of townhomes and apartment buildings, et cetera, because I think part of that reflects changing wants and needs. We hear a lot about millennials, and they don't necessarily want a big house. They might want a townhouse, or they have different needs for their living space. So I think that's important to note. But we're getting short on time, but I really wanted to hear from you about some of the strategies that you are looking at for the redevelopment of the Boulevard Mall, because I think that's really important to Amherst residents, right?
Yeah, it's critical, we'll tackle it from the economic standpoint first. So it's not that long ago that mall property was assessed, 120, $130 million. It's around 20 today, $20 million. So you've seen a five-fold decline in the taxable assessment on that one particular property. And it's a property that has a lot of redevelopment opportunities. It's a big parcel. It's on a major corridor. You have some of the best retail space per square foot, based on per square foot rents, half a mile north of it, in Benderson's complex there, right by the 290 and Niagara Falls Boulevard. So there's really a lot of opportunities there. We worked, and the town worked on new zoning for that property, because we want to see that turn into a neighborhood again, and a 21st century style neighborhood, where we're reintroducing the cross streets that would connect Alberta Drive and Niagara Falls Boulevard. And then you would have buildings that face on it. You're going to have some components of the mall that'll remain, but you'll have some that'll be demoed and reoriented to other buildings on there. We've unfortunately, it's a podcast. We've got some great renderings that were done by a consultant that really shows the potential on what can be done there. Are those renderings available on your website? We probably have them somewhere. I'd have to look. I think so. Because the Boulevard Mall's in a federally designated opportunity zone. So there is a section on our website on the opportunity zone, and there is some images there of the mall and the mall being redeveloped. I don't know if they have any of the newer versions, which introduce some of the green or elements and park elements and public space, but there is something on there that shows how you're taking this, what was a linear box concept, and breaking it up into a place that has everything you could want in your work day, in your off day, to really it's a proverbial live, work, and play environment. And that's really what we're looking to achieve there. It's on an area that there is being studied for some type of light rail or enhanced bus rapid transit, or whatever the mobility choices in the future. I imagine we'll have autonomous electric vehicles scooting around everywhere in the next couple decades. But it's really taking advantage of that corridor, which exists and starts at the foot of Main Street in Buffalo, and really extends out past the university into our Audubon Office Park. And at one point, as part of the NFTA's study along that corridor, I think it was roughly 30 to 35% of the region's employment and economic activity is within a couple miles of that location. So it's really a nexus, and I think the developer there, Douglas Jamal, really sees as kind of an anchor. He has the stuff near the foot of Main Street, and this will be the anchor at the other end, and really wants to create some synergies between the two properties.
Wonderful. I know there's a little bit of that going on at the Eastern Hills Mall out in Clarence, and you can see some of it, and where the old, for those of us who've been around, the old Sears end of it used to be, and I think Uniland has just done a wonderful job out there creating. It is like a little community, kind of a mini, as you said, like a lifestyle center. And so if that's the future for the Boulevard Mall, I think that would be really great for the town. Really nice. And very important to note, I think, what you mentioned about the loss in assessment for the mall, because I think it's probably not something that immediately comes to mind when people drive by and they think, ugh, why don't they do something with that big building? But you have to consider, okay, well, the owners, the rents, what it's zoned for, so many complicated things. And when you have a piece of property that has lost that much value, So I think that's an important role that the IDA plays as well, which is incentivizing someone to do something with that mall, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of why we're here in 2021. In 1973, somebody would say, well, that'd be a good spot to put a steel plant. But in 2021, we're looking at creating those types of environments that people want to live in and people want to work in. And as you mentioned, it's important to take a look at your demographics you're targeting, right? We know the millennials have a certain characteristic. Younger people want to rent. They don't want to deal with maintenance on houses. And then as they transition through their life, and everything seems to be later now, right? I mean, our parents in many cases were, having kids in their late teens, early 20s, and now it's, you're in your 30s before they're really starting to settle down and do those types of things. And some of that's a result of life expectancy, right, and that. But at the same time, I think as you get on kind of the other end of it, as people are nearing retirement or retiring, they don't want to maintain a house either. So they're looking for those types of locations. So in a way, we're accounting for the changing in the demographics and especially an older population that still want to live in the area. They want to go to basically the same doctors and hairstylists and those types of things, but they need some type of residential option that gives them the amenities they're looking for in the location. Otherwise, you're going to lose them to areas, and a lot of times those areas are outside of Western New York and New York State that are going to provide them with right, that type of kind of retirement and golden years of living.
Well, what a great conversation. Thank you so much, Dave Mingoia, Executive Director / CEO / CFO. Do you have any other hats you wear there? Do you make the coffee or?
No, that's it. That's it for now. I'm not trying to take on anymore, but I really appreciate it. I had a great time discussing these very important things, and if there's something in the future, I'd be more than happy to come back on again.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that, because we plan on talking about a lot more things, and even just the surface stuff we've touched on today. We could probably spend a whole episode talking about any one of those points, right? So I appreciate it. And listen, why don't you let everybody know how they can find information? What's your website? How do they get a hold of you if they need to?
Sure. So website is www.amherstida, all one word, .com. All our contacts information out there. I can be reached. Email is probably the best thing. I'm Gen X, so I tend to look at my email all the time still as a main vehicle versus something else. But DMINGOIA at amherstida.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We do have a Facebook page, and we can. There's plenty of ways to get in contact with us. Pick up the phone, 716-688-9000. You'll get somebody here. Be happy to talk to anybody that wants to learn about Amherst and or maybe invest in Amherst. That'd be great.
I just want to remind everyone that our website is ecidany.com. And if you have any questions, want to reach out to anybody, just go to that website. You can click on our podcast page and see our other episodes. And I really want to thank Dave Mingoia from the Amherst IDA for joining us today. And we will see you all next time. Thank you.